So, good afternoon, good evening. Hi, everyone. I'll share my video so that you guys can see me. Hi. More people are coming in, but I thought we can just say a few words in the beginning while people are still logging in. So for those of you who have sort of stumbled onto this talk and you don't know me, my name is Nadine Shaheen. I am a Lebanese type designer. I'm normally based in the UK, currently in Barcelona. I design typefaces. So, you know, this is not my usual kind of talk or my strict area of expertise. However, I did spend 2 years studying at Cambridge for a degree in international relations, which I finished a year and a half ago. So this is not too far off from that. Still, I am not the ultimate expert on this. And if I make mistakes, apologies in advance. And yeah, I can see I think, yeah, we're almost 70. We can begin. So just a bit of housekeeping. If you would like to ask a question, please ask it in the Q&A because that's where I will be looking for questions, and just keep them going as you go. So I will, when I'm done with the presentation part, I'll start with the Q&A. And in case you would like to comment, I think there is a chat option. I don't know if I've actually allowed this or not. Yes, there is a chat. Yeah, hi Eve. So if you guys want, just go ahead and say hi and tell us where you're from. That would be nice. We normally do this on design calls. When it comes to politics and everyone hates one another, it might get us into trouble. But you know, just make sure to say hi, and yeah, your questions in the Q&A, not in the chat. Now, this topic is extremely controversial and talks about what they call the most intractable conflict that has ever been, or that we are currently going through. Not that has ever been, but definitely that we are going through. And so it is of a highly emotional nature. For many people involved in it, is highly complex. And so I would like that we keep it cool and keep it calm and keep it polite, and no anti-Semitism. I will be extremely sharp on that. I do not want to hear any kind of racist comments in either direction. So I'm kicking you out if you engage in that, okay? That's the rule. Yeah, so there is no place for bigotry on this talk. So yeah, I think that's all the rules. And now one last bit of adorable interruption. I have a young puppy. She's currently eating a carrot. When she's done with the carrot, she might start playing, in which case we might hear her, in which case I will go take her, put her in another room. But for now, she's right next to me, actually. Wait, come. I'll show you the puppy, and then maybe at least you will forgive me for the later interruption. So this is Charlie. If the topic becomes too difficult, I will bring her up. Maybe yeah, go down, Habibi. Anyways, so yeah, and so actually, maybe you know what, while people are still signing in, and I can see so many from Saudi, from Greece, from the UK, from Spain. You're the opposite of me, Remando. You're from Spain, based in London. Cool. Vancouver, San Francisco, Barcelona, London, Scotland, Turkey, Brazil, Columbus. My God, no, quite a lot. So amazing. I love you all, and thank you for wanting to know more about this. I might need to interrupt at some point to take the puppy to the other room, so bear with me. This is an extremely informal conversation, okay? This is not your usual type of academic lecture, even though I will try to stick to an academic view of what is going on. The other thing that I wanted to say is, even though on Twitter I am sharing some really, really horrible pictures and lots of heartbreaking videos of what is going on, that is not what we're doing here today. Today, we're looking from the legal perspective, from the nature of what is going on, and trying to analyze. So I hope that, you know, we stick with that kind of approach. So it's not about blaming, it's not about venting. We do that on Twitter. Here, let's analyze. Okay, that's the purpose of this type of conversation that we're having. So the title of the talk today is East Jerusalem. It's not Arab-Palestinian conflict, sorry, well, that also exists. It's not Arab-Israeli conflict. It's not Palestinian-Israeli conflict. It's about East Jerusalem. Because in this latest flare-up of hostilities, it's really coming because of what's happening in East Jerusalem. There is potential to portray this as a Gaza versus Israel type of conflict. It is not. And I will explain later why that is the case. So it's extremely important to go look for the root cause of the problem rather than what is easy to portray and the sort of fallacies that we get into, with the media portrayal of what goes on in Israel and Palestine. So this is about, Palestine, Israel. When it comes to current affairs, it's more about East Jerusalem, and we're looking at the law and the land. I think this is one way to sort of keep the feelings on the side. And for me, I mean, this is an extremely emotional topic for me, you cannot imagine. So I'm really, really trying my best. So yeah, but if we focus on the nature of what happens to the land and what is the legality of that, and the venting about what happens to the people we do on Twitter. So let's try to keep it that way. Anyways, I know I'm repeating myself, but let's begin. We have 95 people. Wow, thank you. Really, I hope that this will make sense for you. I can see Finland, Cambridge. Oh, hey, there's Cambridge. Hi. There's Brighton, Palestine, Haifa. Yeah, hello. New York. Amazing, amazing. Okay, I will read them later. Okay. So thank you. I hope that this will be beneficial. So let's get to it. Where do we begin with such a story? Some people would like to start in this decade. Some people go back to 48. Some people go back to 1917 or pre-biblical times or biblical times. I think what I would like to start with is more medieval, Renaissance type, 500 years ago or so. So wait. Yeah, so we've already discussed the why. Why is it East Jerusalem? Okay, so we go back a little bit in time, a few centuries back, to look at anti-Semitism. So everything that is happening today is coming as a result of that. But it's not where you think this might be going. It's funny that this presentation will start with Shakespeare. It's not a literature presentation, but I think this gives us a really good view in history. I don't know if everyone is familiar with the play The Merchant of Venice by William Shakespeare. In it, there is a character called Shylock, who is a merchant. And actually, no, he's not the merchant. He's the one who has the money. And that's another typical portrayer. But he is Jewish. And within that play, in which he is very poorly portrayed, quite negatively portrayed, he has this monologue: if you prick us, do we not bleed? If you tickle us, do we not laugh? If you poison us, do we not die? It's a very, very evocative monologue, extremely powerful in its impact. There is not conflict, I don't use that word. There are different ways to interpret the character of Shylock within that play. And that particular monologue and the redemption of Shylock, or not the redemption of Shylock. But in any case, whichever way we treat the interpretation of what Shakespeare wanted to do with that play, what is quite clear is that that play is witness to the type of anti-Semitism that was rampant in Europe many centuries ago, all the way to even today. So that's where we begin the story. Because if we had not had centuries of aggression, intimidation, anti-Semitism, harassment, lack of equal rights, lack of access, and so much persecution of the Jewish people in Europe, we would not have come to the point of Zionism, where a certain group of Jewish people wanted to have their own country. And so we would not have gotten to that point. So we really need to start there. We need to start with that first round of hostility and persecution, and recognize that even if we, like myself, I am an Arab and I'm on the other side of the conflict, but I think we need to join in our humanity and recognize where that suffering started. So it's important to start there, I think, with a story, at least for me. It's also important to recognize that there are different definitions of anti-Semitism. In the recent period, there has been a stronger push to label anti-Zionism as anti-Semitism. that if you are against the Zionist project, therefore you are anti-Semitic. I hope that with this presentation, you will see why that definition is not accurate. Anti-Semitism is bigotry. It's the illogical, irrational hatred of the Jewish people and the persecution of that. And that persecution resulted in the horrific crimes that we see in the Holocaust. So that is horrible, and we do not condone that. No human should, to be honest. And when it comes to Zionism, Zionism is a political project. You have Jewish people who are against Zionism, and you have non-Jewish people against Zionism, and vice versa. And so that we can discuss. We can talk about what Zionism is. And there are different types of Zionism as well, which is currently reflected in the different political parties within Israel. And that we also need to recognize. So let's get bit by bit into that. So we start, before we get to the Zionism, we start with the Balfour Declaration in 1917. So as you know, this was going on during the First World War. And this is the copy that was sent to Lord Rothschild with what we call in Arabic Wa'ad Balfour, so the promise of Lord Balfour. But basically in it, I think is important to recognize the phrasing and what was actually promised. The declaration of sympathy with Jewish Zionist aspirations, and that has been submitted to and approved by the cabinet. The Majesty's government view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object. So it's quite interesting, this sentence. So one, for everyone who says there was no Palestine before, no, there was, and you can see it here. And then it's interesting that it's establishment in Palestine, not that all of Palestine will become the home of the Jewish people. That's also interesting to recognize that within that. And also interesting is when it continues, it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine, or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country. That is very far from the reality we have today for many, many reasons. But what is also interesting to recognize is that when that promise was made, let me just move the panels on the side of my screen so I can actually read what is on my screen. The population of Palestine between 1918 and 1920, there was some form of census and estimation, that the Muslim population was 650,000 people. The Christian population was 80,000 people. Oh, and I have a typo here. I'm so sorry. The Jewish population was 60,000. And so this is around 7% of the overall population. So it's extremely, extremely tiny minority. So it's important to recognize that. And this is, the source is A History of Modern Palestine, which is a really, really good book on the topic. When I started at Cambridge, we had a course about the history of the Cold War. In the first lecture, and probably in the first 5 minutes of that lecture, of the entire course I did, our lecturer said that when you want to study history, you have to remember to put yourself in the shoes of the people who were living back then, at which point there were many different possible outcomes to how things would go. So we cannot apply what we know today of what happened after onto the analysis of what was actually taking place at the moment. The reason I say that is because when the Palestinians were rejecting the Jewish state in 1920s and 30s and 40s, they were the majority and they were seeing their land being taken. So at first it was being bought. That's how you got to have the 60,000. But then later, at some point with the conflict, it was forcibly taken. But it's important to keep that in mind because there were many different ways that history could have gone. And that's a very interesting insight to keep. Now, when we come to Zionism, I think it's important to recognize the lack of equality between Zionism and Israel. Israel is not Zionism and Zionism is not Israel. It doesn't go both ways. Yes, the Zionist movement created Israel, that is true. But there are people in Israel today who were born into it. This is their country. They were born to it. Do they subscribe to this ideology? Some of them, yes. A lot of them, yes. But some of them, no. And so it's important to recognize the plurality of opinion within Israel and the plurality of Zionism within Israel as well. So you have the practical Zionism and you have revisionist Zionism. And those are reflected in the left wing and in the right wing and the Likud in Israel. And they mean different things. So before we get into, what we think Zionism is, I thought it might be good to go back in time and to hear from the people who created this movement what they think Zionism is and what the Zionist project is about. So I'm going to read to you a series of quotes, bear with me, because they really give good insight into what the Zionist project was about. And I'll tell you later who Jabotinsky is. Don't go Google, you're cheating. I will tell you later. So he says in an article that he wrote for called The Iron Wall for the Jewish Herald in 1923, he says, there can be no voluntary agreement between ourselves and the Palestinian Arabs, not now, nor in the prospective future. It is utterly impossible to obtain the voluntary consent of the Palestine Arabs for converting Palestine from an Arab country into a country with a Jewish majority. My readers have a general idea of the history of colonization in other countries. I suggest that they consider all the precedents with which they are acquainted and see whether there is one solidarity instance of any colonization being carried on with the consent of the native population. There is no such precedent. Every native population in the world resists colonists as long as it has the slightest hope of being able to rid itself of the danger of being colonized. That is what Arabs in Palestine are doing and what they will persist in doing as long as there remains a solitary spark of hope that they will be able to prevent the transformation of Palestine into the land of Israel. He's very right on that one. There is only one thing the Zionists want, and it is that one thing that the Arabs do not want. For that is the way by which the Jews would gradually become the majority, and then a Jewish government would follow automatically, and the future of the Arab minority would depend on the goodwill of the Jews. Now, he outlines his vision for how you do that, and that philosophy is called the Iron Wall. We cannot offer any adequate compensation to the Palestinian Arabs in return for Palestine, and therefore, there is no likelihood of any voluntary agreement being reached. So that all those who regard such an agreement as a condition sine qua non for Zionism may as well say no and withdraw from Zionism. Zionist colonization must either stop or else proceed regardless of the native population. These are his italics. Which means that it can proceed and develop only under the protection of a power that is independent of the native population behind an iron wall which the native population cannot breach. Either Zionism is moral and just, or it is immoral and unjust. But that is a question that we should have settled before we became Zionists. Actually, we have settled that question, and in the affirmative. We hold that Zionism is moral and just, and since it is moral and just, justice must be done, no matter whether Joseph or Simon or Ivan or Ahmed agree with it or not. There is no other morality. So, Jabotinsky is the founder of revisionist Zionism. He is one of the Zionist leaders. He was a journalist, an orator, man of letters. He played an extremely important role in the establishment of the State of Israel. He died in 1940 of a heart attack, so before the creation of the State of Israel. However, one of his proteges became a prime minister, and the his private secretary and historian is the father of Netanyahu. And the revisionist Zionism as an ideology is currently portrayed in the Likud political party in Israel. So this is that. And his role in Israel is so important that there is Jabotinsky Day, which is like a celebration of him on the 29th of Tammuz. I guess Tammuz is a month. It's funny, in Lebanon, we have Tammuz, which is July. I'm guessing this is July as well, but it's on the Jewish calendar. And this is a national holiday in Israel. So this ideology and this man and the movement that he has created has ruled Israel for many decades and is the current ruling ideology in Israel. I mentioned that we have two types of Zionism. So you have the revisionist and you have the practical, which is more towards the labor Zionist. And that would be, if you want to sort of simplify things, the left wing in Israel has an ideology of land for peace. You give the Palestinians land and they will give you peace. The right wing is peace for peace. And basically, you don't give anything to the Palestinians, which we could see in what we see here in his statement. So that's the ruling ideology. So on the other hand, recent elections in Israel show the domination of the right wing and the Likud party and the offshoots of the Likud party over Israeli politics, and then the encroachment of the far right into main sphere political discourse in Israel. So the same way we see in the US, there's a whole big shift in the right wing towards the more extreme. We saw that already in Israel for many years, and now even more. And this is an important thing to keep in mind. So now we've looked in 1917, we've looked in 1923, then there is 1948, which is celebrated, it was a couple of days ago, a Nakba by the Palestinians, which is I actually don't know how to translate it into English. It's just the great tragedy. And it's celebrated in Israel as the day of creation of Israel. So you can see immediately the contrast in the perception of what had happened on that day in May in 1948. There are many things we can say about why only the state of Israel was declared in 1948 and not both Israel and Palestine, because that was the plan. The plan was to have both. But the Palestinians were like, no, I'm not giving you half my country. All of it is my country. And so there were issues there, and only Israel got declared, and then the rest is history, as they say. The way that I've structured the lecture is basically that I'm skipping over everything that happened between then and now, because it's a lot of history. And I think at the moment, we need to focus on the ramifications and where we are today, rather than to go into every war that happened and what it means and why, and every terrorist attack that happened, and every bomb that fell, and every assassination. It is quite a lot of history. I mean, so much time has happened. But it derails us from being able to analyze where we are today and what does it mean and why are all these things happening. And that's why that's what I want to focus on. So imagine that we have a really big building. We've now discussed the foundations, how the state ideology was being built. Then eventually it got built. We're not going to tell you how. You can read about that in the books. And now we're going to take the elevator and go all the way up to the 10th floor, where there is a room where all the current events are happening, right? We're going to stay in that room. If you guys want, at some point, if you have questions about the Abraham Accords and what they mean, we can, go into the room next to it, and that's where they are. But see, now the puppy is, yeah. So ponder on that for a second, because I need to put the puppy in the second room. Wait for me, okay? Just a second. Okay, sorry about that. She sees shadows reflected and she thinks we are under attack. So anyways, yeah, so basically, yeah, we're taking shortcuts, but it's important to recognize the trend of what has happened between then and now, right? So for that, we need to look at two things. One is a curiously little recognized fact that I only got to know when I went to Cambridge, and I'm ashamed that I didn't know before. But basically, Israel is the only country that does not recognize its own borders. So if you ask the Israelis, what are your borders? They cannot tell you. Same if you ask them, do you have nuclear weapons? Their policy is not to tell you, even though they have quite a lot of them. So yeah, it doesn't. And if you look at the requirements by law of what makes a country, you need to have a permanent population, permanent borders, the ability to engage with other countries. And there's a fourth one, which I forgot, of course, because I always forget things. So anyways, but basically having permanent borders defines who you are as a country, because how can you protect your own borders if you don't know what they are? But Israel does not recognize its own borders because of the curious fact that you can see over here, which is the fact that Israel keeps growing over time. This is why the status quo is in favor of Israel. No fighting is in favor of Israel, because with every passing day, more Palestinian homes and villages are erased, and new Israeli settlements and homes are being built. They raise the villages, they change the name, and they build new things on them. And so when you look at what used to be Palestine in 1946, most of it was Palestinian land. And then the UN plan in 1947 suddenly took half of it away. So the Palestinians of 1947 were like, why are you taking half my country away from me and giving it to people who just arrived here, right? That's what they were thinking. That's why they were saying no to this plan, because Palestine was for the Palestinians. But then over time, of course, Israel was recognized, Palestine was not. And then in 1967, there was a war in 56, a war in 67, but 67, Israel made quite territorial gains. And so you get the borders of 1967, which you will hear about quite regularly when you dig into the topic. And then there is this snapshot from 11 years ago. There's a slightly more updated version with even less land for the Palestinians. And so you can see the trend of what happens when you don't define your own borders. Because when you don't define them, you keep growing them. And when your policy is to keep building settlements and challenge anyone who decides to not recognize those settlements and to not accept international law because these settlements are illegal according to international law, this is the reality. So we hear a lot like, oh my God, we want a ceasefire. Just stop the bombs. That's what we want. That's usually the reaction of people who are not from Palestine or from the region. Because yes, of course, we want the bombs to stop, but the status quo is the continuous theft of Palestinian land. That is what we see on the ground. It doesn't make headline news, but it is the reality. And this is at the heart of the Palestinian struggle and at the heart of the betrayal of the international community towards the Palestinians. Because it's very easy for US governments, European governments, even Arab governments to come out and say, no, you need to stop, we need a ceasefire, no hostilities, and we support the two-state solution. Okay, amazing, two-state solution. If we were in 1967, that might still be the case. In 2010, in 2020, those little bits of land left for the Palestinians, they don't touch one another. You can't even get to one another from, without having to go through areas that are for the settlements and controlled by Israel. So with every passing day, the possibility of an actual practical two-state solution becomes less and less likely, which means that when politicians and media personalities hide behind, oh my God, we want a two-state solution, just stop the hostilities, go back to negotiation, you're basically opting in to allow the continuation of settlement building and the theft of Palestinian land, because that's what happens on the ground. So that's an extremely, extremely important element that is missing in all this, because we do not want a return to the status quo, at least not me, and I can only speak for myself. I want liberty for the Palestinians. We don't want to, have people being kicked out of their homes and being threatened in their home. That cannot be the case, but we're getting emotional here. So let's go back to the reality. So on a day-to-day basis, Palestinian homes are being erased, settlements are being built, and in East Jerusalem is being taken over by settlers, and we'll talk a little bit more when we get to the actual flashpoint. But that is the reality of what happens, and we need to keep it in mind. So, are you guys all still with me? Let me see who's saying, if you guys are saying anything in the chats. You are, catastrophe. Yes, that's how we say it. And Nakba is a catastrophe. Exactly. Yeah. Sometimes I miss. Okay, so it's just funny because with this, I'm the only, okay, you guys are still with me. Good, good. Let's see how many. We have 1 of 5 people. Amazing, amazing. Okay, so it's interesting also to look, so we've looked at what has happened over time. And so we've seen the loss of Palestinian land and the theft of Palestine, not loss, the theft of Palestinian land, because that is what's happening. Because the Palestinians are not being compensated. They don't come and give them money. No, they just kick them out, raise their homes, and then build shiny new settlements. So the other aspect, of course, is to look at the human cost. And this is not a tally of all the Palestinians who have died over time. This is just since 2008. So we often hear this, like, the both siding of what we call the conflict, or what they are calling the conflict, and we'll get to the words we use later in a little bit. But it hides that the fact that there is a massive imbalance in the numbers of casualties on the two sides. This is not 2 equal sides going to war. This is not England versus France, or Germany versus France, or Germany versus Russia, where you have 2 states coming against one another and battling it out, and you get Waterloo and you get what else. No, no, no. This is one occupying power with a preponderance of power, nuclear weapons. They could nuke Gaza if they wanted, except it's right on their doorstep, so they would suffer for it. But this is a preponderance of power on one side, with the latest technology, one of the strongest armies in the world, versus people who have been under occupation for many, many decades, right? So there's quite a big difference. And when you look at the number in terms of the injuries and in terms of the deaths, I think the numbers speak for themselves. Now, you would think that when this is reported that there's a bigger outrage, but there isn't. It will make headline news when 1 Israeli dies. If 1 Palestinian person dies, it's nothing. It's not. This is like business as usual. There's nothing. It doesn't even, like, barely nothing. It's not news. It's not news because over the process of the last few decades, they have been dehumanized to the point where they do not count. It doesn't matter that they die, because it's almost like they were born to die. And I know it sounds romantic, but it's not. It's horrible. And so it's important to recognize that there is an imbalance in the suffering, in the number of casualties, but then also in the number of injuries, because even when you call it injuries, it sounds bland. Like, yeah, they got injured. Oh my God, civilian casualties, like collateral damage, but it's not collateral damage. For example, in 2018, you can see the massive number of injuries. So what happened there? That's when there was the conflicts and the March of Great Return, if I remember correctly, either this one or this one. I'm missing the dates. I should have checked. But anyways, so in the March of Great Return, when they were signing the recognizing Jerusalem as the state of, the capital of Israel and all of that, they were peaceful. At first, they started peaceful, protesting on the borders of Gaza, and they were being shot at. And when they were being shot at by snipers, they get shot in the knees or in the head. And so a lot of these injuries, they are not collateral damage. These are targeted injuries meant to mutilate people so that they cannot become bodily active, right? So if you look into it and you Google, like, the number of people who are shot in the knees, they know. And there was once someone in IDF was saying, like, we know where every bullet goes. Yeah, we know that, we see it, because it's not it cannot be coincidence that everyone suddenly is shot in the knees. It's not a magnet. The knees don't attract the bullets, and it's a small area. It's not like the chest, which is bigger. Like to hit someone who's running away or towards you, and to hit them in the knee, you have to be really a good sniper. Like they get credit for that. They're well trained, but there is viciousness in that. So even when we look and analyze what happened in those injuries, we need to dig a little bit below the surface. So when we come to the present point and the 2021 flashpoints, it started making headline news once you got Hamas firing rockets at Israel. For those of you who follow me on Twitter, you know that I've been posting a lot about all of this for like a very long time. So I've been harassing everyone by posting too much, but also that it's not Gaza versus Israel. It's not. It's just international media got interested when the rockets started falling on the Israelis. That's when, but that reveals their bias, not the nature of the conflict. So in the flashpoints themselves, there are many, many things that were happening. So this, by the way, this is a rubber bullet. This is what Umayma, so the designer I mentored, and we, by the way, will see a video by her later on. She got shot by this in the leg. This is the rubber bullet, and they shoot people in the eyes. 3 of her friends got shot in the eyes. But again, we go now towards the emotional. So let's keep it on the side. We'll get pissed off later. But basically, what was going on is that there is this area in East Jerusalem called Sheikh Jarrah. And there are a number of Palestinian families that are facing, quote unquote, evictions. Now, evictions, you would think, they didn't pay their rent, or, maybe there's a conflict over who owns the building or whatever, right? But that is not the case. What the case is that before 1948, there were Jewish, like there wasn't a separation between what is Arab and what is Jewish. And so you had Jewish families who were in East Jerusalem who escaped because it became Arab, and they went to West Jerusalem. And there were Arabs in West Jerusalem who escaped and went to East Jerusalem because, again, they were segregating. A little bit like what happened in Beirut. So in our civil war, and Beirut was cut in half. You got the Christian side in the East and the Muslim side in the West. This is, population, like segregation that comes at the point of conflict, right? You go live with the people who are like you. That's what happens. So, but what happens is that the Arab, Palestinian families who are from West Jerusalem, there is no way they can go to West Jerusalem and claim their homes. There's no way. The ones who were kicked out of the country, they can never go back. I think this is very important. I don't have it in the presentation, but like anyone who was kicked out of Palestine in 1948 or after, they have no right to return to their homeland. So, but anyways, so those families who were in West Jerusalem came to East Jerusalem, and some of them live in homes that were previously owned by Jewish families who are now in West Jerusalem. But then they've been there for decades and decades. And so it's a quite complicated situation. But the reality is that the courts will come and say, we have an Ottoman era like deed saying that this was owned by a Jewish family, not this Jewish family, a Jewish family. And because you're Palestinian, you're going to get kicked out, and we will bring another Jewish family to live in the home where you are now living. We might probably destroy it, build a nicer one, but those same families, if they were like, yeah, but I came here because I got kicked out of West Jerusalem, can I go there and say, hey, I have the deeds to my home and it's mine and I'm asking for it, give it to me? Tough luck, you can't do that. So this is at the heart of the imbalance, because, and you hear it, Umayma will say it in the video, you're a tourist in your own country. So it's a bit of honestly, like, it's hilarious if you're reading about this. It's, yeah. Anyway, so this is the point. So these people, these families are facing eviction, but they are not the only ones. There are many other neighborhoods, whether it is in East Jerusalem or in the West Bank, where Palestinians are continuously being harassed, intimidated, threatened with the court, and the court will always side with the Jewish family, whether they have any relationship to the house or not, doesn't matter. Now, it was quite interesting because now the Palestinians are recording things on video. It's a bit like with BLM, right? So the Black Lives Matter, when suddenly you got to see the videos of police people killing Black people, suddenly people saw the injustice, even though the injustice has been happening for decades. In the same way it is here, because there was this hilarious video of a guy with a quite American accent. And he comes into someone's house and she films him. And he was like, look, I didn't make this problem, but like he wants to steal her house. And he's standing like, look, I'm not who made the system. If I don't steal it, someone else will. So basically, I will steal it. And so they come into the house, they beat people, they harass them, they kick them out, there's conflict. So it's not like you're living in East Jerusalem and you're happy and like enjoying life in the middle of COVID. No, you get people beating down on your door, they're coming in, they harass you, and then there is no police to call, because if the police comes, they help the settlers. So basically you're fucked either way. And so that is the reality. The reality is daily intimidation. It's not that this happened and has never happened before. No, it's just that this time it managed to break it into the collective consciousness of people who don't live there. That's what's different this time. Then people started to mobilize. These videos were going viral, and there was elevated hostilities from both sides. The settlers are becoming more vocal in the harassment, and the extreme right wing, encouraged by Netanyahu, because they are in his, they're now in the Knesset, and they are in his political alliance, and their leaders, support this type of harassment, like literally support it. They are becoming even more mobilized. There was another video that went viral where part of Al-Aqsa was on fire, and you get like crowds of hundreds and thousands of, probably a couple of thousand guys on the Israeli side jumping and dancing like a rave. It looks like a rave, but it's not. So there is this heightened hostilities, and then there was, obviously we were in Ramadan at the time, and people were praying in Al-Aqsa Mosque, and the police came into the prayer and were shooting and with tear gas and what else, and this is a desecration of a holy site. You don't have to be religious to recognize that this is an insult, and this is a desecration, and more important, that this is provocation, because it cannot be that you desecrate someone's holy place and not expect them to react. This is like you're sitting on a powder keg and you decide to throw a flame, and of course it explodes. So this like, it cannot be unknown. That's how intifadas happen, right? This is how the uprisings begin. And so I would seriously doubt that the attack on Al-Aqsa was just policing as usual. I would say it probably was sort of, because we do have one winner of the recent conflict. I'll get to it in a little bit. So basically this was going on, and of course this created higher levels of escalation, and then you get Hamas coming into this arena, and they started firing rockets from Gaza on Israel. Now this is one of the, if I am not wrong, the first instances where Hamas is responding to violence outside of Gaza, which is new. But at the same time, anyway, so the rockets started falling on Israel, and of course suddenly the media was interested. They're like, oh my God, Israel is under attack, we need to report on this. And of course, in response, Israel launches a sustained assault on Gaza. And we need to use different words, by the way, because the rockets that Hamas fires, they're basically crude. They're unguided, they don't have control on them. Some of them fall inside Gaza because like almost homemade rockets. On the other hand, Israel has an extremely sophisticated military industry, and basically showcases what it can do on Gaza. So, and we will see later someone else's analysis saying that. So this assault that we see, also the videos, the tower blocks falling, the building of Associated Press and Al Jazeera falling because terrorists were inside, is quite nice when we see, because like whenever Netanyahu or anyone, from IDF is asked, like, why did you do this in Gaza? It's always, it was Hamas. Hamas is there, it's like the boogeyman. I'm not saying Hamas is good, but I'm saying it's a convenient boogeyman to keep. Anyways, and so then you get the exchange of rockets of various sizes and different assault capabilities. But anyways, and then of course you have the riots, which is quite interesting to see, because this is a different type of development. So you had one night, and it's like one night of Arabs rioting and burning of cars, and there was one synagogue, I think, that was burned. I'm not sure. And then there was the counterattacks, and then the settlers going in the streets and like knocking on people's homes and attacking people, and mobs lynching people, pulling them out of the cars and beating them up, some of them dying. And so and then of course there were the arrests, because of course if you have a riot, the police will come and they will arrest. Now most of the people arrested are the Palestinians of Israel, and then a few Israelis of the left-wing side, but then of course the people who were charged were only the Palestinians, because that's how things work in Israel. So that's what's like the current sort of drama, for lack of a better word, is happening on different fronts. Today is a particularly interesting day because it's the first time since 1938 that you have a strike, a general strike by all Palestinians of all types. Now, it's interesting also to recognize that that type of unity has not been a feature of Palestinian politics for the many decades since we've had this problem. They are segregated both physically and politically, and so you will have the Palestinians who are, they could be called, some call them the Arab Israelis, some call them the 1948 Palestinians, which means those Palestinians who were in the land that became the state of Israel, and so they were given Israeli citizenship. And then you will have the Palestinians of East Jerusalem, which Umayma is one of, and they have permanent residency, but they don't have permanent residence of their own city and country. But there is no country because there is no Palestine as a country, at least recognized by the big powers, most of them. And then you will have the Palestinians living in the West Bank, and then Palestinians living in Gaza. They're all segregated. We'll get to that in a little bit. But what we are seeing today is quite particular, that you will get this unity across the Palestinian factions as well. So we're still with 107 people. I have not scared people away, so that's good. Yeah, don't forget, if you have any questions, just put them in the Q&A, not in the chat. In the chat, we can speak freely. But yeah, okay. So let's look at the background of interesting things that help us understand what is going on, right? Because it's very easy to get lost in the details of the horror, but we need to step back and see the bigger picture to understand what is going on. What does it mean? And what are the trends that we are seeing? Because what is happening today, in the past week in particular, is one of those points that will go into history books of the transformation of the Palestinian struggle. At least that's what I think. And even if it's not, there's many things that are happening now, and there will be people who will write their theses on this. This will become the topic of books, because many things are happening at the same time. In a way, the stars are aligning, but so there is hope in the middle of the horror, but we'll get to it later. So there's a few things that we need to keep in mind, and I don't go into the Abraham Accords, so the peace, quote unquote, treaties of last year, and but we can, if you want, I can talk to that in the Q&A. You can ask me. So one of the biggest sort of earthquakes that has happened recently was in just last month, where Human Rights Watch, which is the largest, most respected human rights organization in the world, basically said that the Israeli authorities are committing crimes against humanity of apartheid and persecution of the Palestinian people. Now, to come out and say that Israel is apartheid would have been career ending for anyone, even maybe last year, even potentially still today. But this is big because we've had South Africa being, apartheid before. We know what that label means, and we know what we need to do to counter that. We know that it is really the boycotting of apartheid that will bring it down. But it's also one of the ugliest forms of political regimes that you can expect. So if you want to sort of insult a state, you can either tell it you're an autocracy, but even worse still, you're apartheid, because autocracy, you're being a dictator over everyone. Apartheid is like, no, there's actual segregation. And so this is quite a big deal that a Human Rights Watch would come out and say that. But this is even supported by the fact that one of the leading human rights organizations within Israel, B'Tselem, also said the same thing just a little bit earlier and before Human Rights Watch. So now we have two major organizations, human rights organizations. One Israeli, one is the global biggest one, saying that Israel is committing apartheid. This is a massive, massive development because it means that it gives political cover for everyone who thinks to be able to say it out loud. Because normally, if you criticize Israel, there's a very likely chance you'll be accused of anti-Semitism. And the fact that now we have proof, because there are these independent human rights organizations who have come and have studied and have analyzed and have come to this very difficult conclusion, that means that what you are saying is not based on irrational bigotry, but rather the understanding of the reality on the ground. Now, if you are not sure what apartheid means, apartheid is the segregation of two peoples in the same country where they are governed by different laws. And in the West Bank, you will have the areas that are Palestinian, and then the areas that used to be Palestinians and are now settlements. The settlers who live in the settlements are governed by Israeli civil law. The Palestinians are covered by, or governed, not covered, governed by Israeli military law. And the only difference between you as a human being in that geographical location being governed by military versus civil law comes down to your ethnicity. Are you Jewish or are you Palestinian? And that's why it's apartheid. So it's a typical dictionary definition of what apartheid is. But of course, there is always the Israeli exception in international relations. And I think that's why it took so long for organizations to be able to come out and say these things. So that's important. Like I said, B'Tselem is also, making the same conclusion. And even this, like from a couple of days back, the director, the head of, B'Tselem, was describing, he's saying, it's not complicated, believe your eyes, follow your conscience. The reason that it looks like apartheid is simply because it is apartheid. And this, in a way, we can borrow a phrase from British and US politics. If it quacks like a duck and it walks like a duck, it's probably a duck. And so if it looks like apartheid and behaves like apartheid, then probably is apartheid. And so the segregation in the West Bank of Palestinians into their villages and then the settlers into their settlements, that is the segregation. And then you put on top of that the different laws with which they are being governed, then you see that. But this sort of adjective being put in front of the name of Israel is also, like, it's quite important, but we also see something else which is going on, which is a shift in US politics towards the relationship with Israel. So normally, in the US, Israeli support is bipartisan. It's probably the only issue where Democrats and Republicans will never disagree. Probably the only issue. Everything else is partisan these days. But in recent years, the progressive arm of the Democrats has become more vocal and critical of the behavior of Israel with relation to the Palestinians. And this is led by people like Bernie Sanders, who himself is Jewish And of course, you all know he was winning quite well in the primaries, and he was one of the reasons why Joe Biden won the election. And you can see he's saying, like on May 8th, he says the US must speak out strongly against the violence by government-allied Israeli extremists in East Jerusalem and the West Bank, and make it clear that the evictions of Palestinian families must not go forward. Then in May 16 in Gaza, he says, the devastation in Gaza is unconscionable. We must urge an immediate ceasefire. The killing of Palestinians and Israelis must end. We must also take a hard look at nearly $4 billion a year in military aid to Israel. It is illegal for US aid to support human rights violations. What he is saying makes complete sense. It's just this has never been said before in the US. This is new. I have never seen this in my lifetime. And I'm actually quite glad to see that the discourse is becoming fairer and more humane when it comes to the recognition of Palestinians as humans. And then even more forward is AOC. Now, she goes viral on a regular basis, but you can see what she was saying just 3 days ago. She says apartheid states aren't democracies, and you can see 318,000 people liked it. So I think this is a reply to when people say Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East, and she's telling them apartheid states aren't democracies. And of course, she's right with that, because democracies are equal rights for everyone, and apartheid is by definition not. So she's gone quite extreme. She got a lot of flack for it, of course, as well. But this is unimaginable a few years back. And it shows that there will be a split between the progressive arm of the Democratic Party and the more, traditional arm. And so that we will need to see. Elizabeth Warren was also quite supportive as well. So this is a very interesting trend to see. What is also interesting, for example, the lobbyist group J Street was actually criticizing the Israeli Foreign Ministry, because the Israeli Foreign Ministry was saying, regrettably, the PA and Palestinian terror groups are presenting a real estate dispute between private parties as a nationalistic cause in order to incite violence in Jerusalem. I mean, obviously, this is wrong on so many accounts, because it's not the PA and it's not terror groups that are complaining. It's the people who live in those houses who are complaining that their houses, that they're being evicted. And it is a national cause because it's happening all over Palestinian territories. But then J Street are saying real estate dispute is a fundamentally inaccurate way of saying forceful expulsion of Palestinian families from their homes. So again, this would have been unthinkable just a few years back. So we are seeing this, and it means a fundamental shift in the relationship between the US and Israel, because there are now people who are calling within the Congress for, we haven't reached the sanctions portion yet, but they are saying that the aid needs to be on condition, right? It cannot be unconditional aid. Basically, the US gives the $3.8 billion every year to Israel, and they do with it whatever they want. And of course, that's on top of all the other types of preferential treatment that Israel gets, different from any other country, but that's a different story. So we are seeing a very dramatic shift within the US, and we know that the US is the only actor able to really effect change when it comes to Israeli policy. They're the only ones who can. And so the only hope will be in the ability of US progressives to push the US towards a fairer view of how to treat this. And we can talk forever about this. Let me check the time. My God, it's already 1 hour. Okay, so I need to go faster. Yeah, we can talk about this a little bit later as well, if you would like if anyone would like to at least hear my views on what the US needs to be doing. But anyways, so there is this other thing that we need to talk about, which is what's happening in Israeli politics. Because typically, at least when I was in Lebanon, like you see Israel as a monolith, you see the US as a monolith, but that is a basic flaw in looking at other states. We need to understand their domestic politics and what's going on. So there has been 4 elections in the last couple of years in Israel. And every time Netanyahu is able to sort of like scrape by to be able to build a new government, and then it falls apart, and then new elections are called. Now, why is Netanyahu so desperate to hang on to power rather than, say, go out of power for a few years and then come back stronger? It's because he's facing charges of corruption, and he will go to jail if he loses protection. So he's fighting for his freedom, basically, but not in the nice type of way we understand it.
And so what happens now that, and this is from May 13th, so just last week, in the last set of elections, Netanyahu didn't get the majority he needed. He tried to form a government, he wasn't able to. So then Naftali Bennett, who's another even more extremist guy, but anyways, this is crazy. But anyways, so what happened is, as you can see here, in a dramatic shift, Israel's right-wing kingmaker, Naftali Bennett, has announced he will no longer seek an alternative government to oust Netanyahu, right? So basically, Netanyahu was no longer able to form a government, which means he's going to jail. And Naftali was supposed to form this other government. But then because of the hostilities and the fighting with Gaza, suddenly Naftali does not want to, challenge Netanyahu. And so Netanyahu is the winner in all of this. He is the only winner, really, because the Israelis are sitting in their shelters and getting bombed. The Gaza is being wiped out, people going homeless. The rest of us watching in horror, we're all traumatized, and he gets to not go to prison. So basically, yeah. So as you can see, Bennett had been on the verge of a power-sharing deal with centrist opposition leader Yair Lapid that would have made him prime minister for 2 years. Without Bennett, Lapid has no path to majority. So Netanyahu stays in power. So that's at the heart of why now, and why I was saying that the police attack on Al-Aqsa could have been deliberate provocation, because in a way, Hamas and Netanyahu need one another. Hamas was no longer able to sort of keep the imagination of the Palestinian people and speak for their voice, right? I mean, they got elected into power and have been holding on to power in Gaza because there has been no election since then. But now, you like yesterday, I saw it, there are Fatah soldiers in West Bank calling the name of the Hamas leader because they were seeing Hamas bombs falling on Gaza and actually inflicting damage rather than popping like fireworks. And so they were heartened, and so they were cheering for them. So you see that Hamas gains from confrontation. Netanyahu gains also from confrontation. And in the middle, the civilians are getting, buried under rubbles and dying in their hundreds. So that's the reality of what is going on, and how we need to see. There will very likely be another election, a fifth one. We'll need to see, maybe in a couple of months or something. But this is the reality. So, and then there is the other sort of even worse side of why things happen. Like why do they bomb Gaza so viciously? They're not really getting any target. It's not like when they go and they bomb, like nuclear facilities in Iran and they are able to score a tactical advantage. No. So, but there is this Institute for Policy Studies, and I will read out loud. So basically, there are people who are saying no one benefits from this, right? But they're saying, no, that's not true. There are 3 ways. So one, which is what I was saying. So Netanyahu faces jail time for corruption charges once he leaves office. He's sweating. If he can maintain key levels of US backing, he'll keep more political support. And history shows that US backing rises when Israeli troops are on the attack. And then the strategic, it's long been a military approach for Israel to quite frequently strike Gaza to keep the enemy off balance. This strategy of regular bombardment to stifle any resistance to Israel's oppression is openly disturbingly known as mowing the grass in Gaza. And there's this guy that I follow, he's from Gaza on Twitter. Every week he's like, oh yeah, we just got bombed. Oh yeah, we just got bombed. And so it happens on a regular basis. It's just only when Hamas responds that it makes the headline news. But bombing Gaza is unfortunately a way of life, or the reality at least. And then there is the financial, and this is really the worst of it, honestly, because you can understand the guy trying to stay out of prison. No, I mean, I don't like him, but like I can understand he doesn't want to go to jail. So yeah, he clings on to power with his teeth. But the financial bit, so Israeli weapons makers export deals, $7.2 billion in 2019, represent much of Israel's GDP. Israeli officials openly state that there is a financial incentive to test these weapons on real people, usually Gazans. What has proven itself in battle is much easier to sell. So these videos that we are all sharing and going viral because there is this one rocket that brought down a high-rise, there is probably a sales guy making phone calls, talking to friendly, quote unquote, governments, saying like, hey, what do you think of this? Would you like to order a couple? or a dozen or whatever it is. So that's the military industry, but it's quite a shame that the Gazans are they're a sales tool at the end of the day. That's how they are. They have to die so that people can sell weapons, and I find that to be disheartening, to say the least. I'm trying not to swear, but anyways. So then there is the problem in framing. And this is not really a question of background or a question of events. It's the words we use, right? So there will be people who will come and tell you, oh my God, this is a religious conflict. We stay out of it. This is Jewish and Muslim people killing one another. It's so complex. Oh my God. And I will stay out of it. Now, it's not a religious conflict because this is a conflict over land. It's your village being erased and you being kicked out of it. And so that is the heart of the problem, not the fact that they are of another religion. It would have still been a problem if they were the same religion. It's the theft of land and the kicking people out. Now, of course, when the Israelis are doing it, like the government is kicking people out of East Jerusalem because they want to make East Jerusalem more Jewish as a declared purpose, and this is public. They do that, yes, that's where the religion comes in. But the heart of the reason why there is a conflict is because there are people living on land and other people coming and colonizing them. And as you've seen with Jabotinsky and what he was saying, these are the natives and the colonizers. And so to use the term colonization of Palestine is not, we can just quote him, right? We're not inventing anything. And then there is the false equivalence as well. Like when you talk about the Palestinian-Israeli conflict and people talk about Palestine and US aid to Palestine and like, yeah, we're giving Palestine so much money. Why can't they have a good government? Look what the Israelis are doing. Why can't they be like them? Why do they want war all the time? But this is a false equivalence because Israel is a recognized state. It has a capital, it has passports, its citizens can travel, it can negotiate treaties and trade deals and have diplomatic representation in other countries that recognize it, which is practically everyone except a few Arab states left and maybe a few more. But basically it's part of the club of countries that are recognized and are able to exist as countries. The Palestinians are not. They have been segregated into different areas. They do not control their own borders. And each area where they are segregated has a slightly different, status, but they don't control their own government because like in East Jerusalem, they can't even vote. So there goes. They do not have a country as a country. They cannot make trade deals. They do not control their airspace. They do not control their sea borders. They cannot go into sea as they want. They do not control their money. They do not control anything. And Gaza, by the way, is under siege since 2007. So that we forgot to say. And like I was reading once the list of things you can't get into Gaza, and there was chocolate on it at some point. I was like, why? Why are they building tunnels with a chocolate? Like why? Like is it Hansel and Gretel and a house made of chocolate? Like why is chocolate something you can't get into Gaza? Now I don't know if that has changed. Probably yes. I hope for the kids at least. But anyways. So there is this false equivalence because it's not two states at war. You have a colonizing entity and a colonized people. That is the reality. That's why the Palestinians do not have the same type of privileges that come with being a state, of being able to have representation in the UN as a country. And so we really need to recognize that, because when we keep talking Palestine, Israel, you start to think of them as almost the same, except one of them is portrayed as ultra modern and nice, and the other one is portrayed as backward and, a little bit of terrorism and all of that. And so, negatively seen, but this is not the reality of it. This is people who are literally fighting or peacefully resisting to just exist. And then there is the problem of language, of the words that we use. Again, so it's not just the framing, but the narrative. So this, for example, one tweet, which is quite funny, after years of quiet, Israeli-Palestinian conflict explodes. Why now? I mean, maybe the guy is innocent and he doesn't know that it's actually not years of quiet, that Gaza gets bombed on a regular basis, that settlers are going into Palestinian homes every day to threaten them, to kick them out of their homes, that Palestinian villages are being erased on a regular basis. That's not quiet. It's just quiet for you when you're in the US and you don't get to hear about it. So, apologies for that, but they exist. So no, it's not years of quiet. The horror of the status quo, which is the status quo, that quiet is basically theft of Palestinian land. So yeah, anyways. So, and then you have the clashes. The clashes again implies sort of comparable firepower between the two sides, but it isn't. The homegrown missiles that Hamas can fire at Israel are practically ineffective. I mean, yeah, they make a few sparks and unfortunately do at some point inflict casualties, but we cannot compare with the type of bombings that flatten out high rises on top of the people in them when Gaza is being hit. And then the rockets fired, again, they're not the same type of rocket. I feel like we need like rocket and super rocket, or rocket and giant rocket, and or something, right? To be able to explain the difference in the firepower, right? We never talk about the TNT and the kilograms of what is being dropped by either side, because then again, it would be just like the death tolls, which is highly, highly skewed in one direction versus the other. The clash is the same, right? It's a very easy word to hide behind. The clashes, they're back at it again. They're irrational. Why do they hate us so much? It's the type of like laziness, intellectual laziness, to call it that way. I don't know what to call it, but it's more likely resistance if you're looking from the Palestinian side, and from probably even the Israeli part, no? It's the natives resisting the settlers at the end of the day, and colonialism. And it's quite funny that in academia today, we talk about decolonizing the curricula, but we're not decolonizing Palestine. Can we start with that, please? But anyways, and then there is this one from, again, the New York Times. It was like more than 67 Palestinians, including 16 children, have died since the start of the conflict on Monday, Palestinian health officials said. The rockets fired by Hamas and its Islamist ally, Islamic Jihad, killed at least 6 Israeli civilians, including a 5-year-old boy and a soldier. So when the Palestinians die, they die. It's almost like, yeah, but like, how did they die? Was it COVID? Was it cancer? Like, how did they die? They die. It's never that we're killed. It's never Israeli forces killed Palestinians. No. The Palestinians died. And there's never like, oh my God, well, with exception, I'm speaking with very broad terms here. Like, it's not Palestinian civilians. Some news media will say the civilians were this much, the fighters were, or at least they will count the children, how many. But the Israelis always like, oh my God, you have to highlight how many Israeli civilians have died, because it seems that you can lump all the Palestinians together under one category so that they all die off collectively together. It doesn't matter civilian or not. And then, but the Israelis, no, you have to distinguish between the civilians, because Israeli civilians are never allowed to die in this conflict. So, so this is, again, is the words that you use, and it takes training to recognize that this is not, that the words have meaning and they are powerful and they shape how you understand the reality. And it's always the Hamas killing Israeli civilians, but the Palestinians, they just die. It happened the same with the March of Great Return, where they would report, 100 Palestinians died at the border. Yeah, how did they die? They were shot and killed. That's how they died. And so it's important to remember that we cannot forget the humanity. Even if we side with the other, we cannot forget the humanity of those people who are, falling victim to what is going on. And then finally, I thought it would be nice to sort of summarize all of it. This is the last slide. I've taken so much time, but I still want to show you a video. So we will go over an hour and a half, I'm afraid. I'm sorry, just stick with me. We're now down to 95, which is still quite good. And I still want to take some questions. I'm happy to stay on, it's fine. The puppy is asleep. So basically, as a summary of all of this, like what I've been trying to say, the false equivalence and all of that. If we want to sort of abstract the situation, we have an occupier and we have the occupied. The occupier is existing in the 1948 borders. Those were the borders that were recognized in the UN and by the major powers of the time. Then you will have the 1967 borders. Those were taken by force. Now, someone will jump up and say, but before countries would always like invade other countries and take them in. Yes, but after World War II, there was a norm and an agreement in international law that you cannot acquire territory by war. You cannot do that. You do not by force. You cannot do that because otherwise states would still be at war with one another. That's why when Crimea came up, the conflict and Russia was, taking part of Ukraine, that was why it was such a big deal. And sanctions were put on Russia because you're not supposed to, at this day and age, acquire territory by force. And so the 1967 borders were taken by force, but there is no one alive today, as far as I know, who is saying we need to go back to 1948 borders. That battle has been lost. And so now when they claim we want the 1967 borders, that's already almost lost as well. But normally that's what they're talking about. So on top of the 1967 borders, you have other expansions. So for example, there is the annexation of East Jerusalem. There is the Golan Heights, which people like to forget. So basically, Israel occupies part of Syria and has occupied part of Syria forever now. But, good luck. And then there is also the Shaba farms in Lebanon that they still occupy, and that Israel occupied part of Lebanon, a significant part of Lebanon, up until the year 2000. But anyways, so in terms of this expansion, you get the East Jerusalem, which is sort of now added under Israeli law, and the US has recognized all of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, and this was Trump. Biden has not revoked that. I don't think he will have the political capital to do so. So I don't think that's going to happen. So it's really international law that will have to come and rule, because according to international law, East Jerusalem is Palestinian territory. Now, within the Palestinian territories, we have, like I said, different geographies. So you have the West Bank, and within the West Bank, you have all these settlements, right? If you remember the slide that I was showing, actually, let me just go back very quickly and show you the slide, because then it's easier. Wait, where is it? Here. So this is Gaza, and this is the West Bank, okay? And now everything gray, these are like settlements and areas that Israel took over, okay? So this is what remains of the West Bank. This is what remains of Gaza. So yeah, let's go back to my graphic. Yeah, so you have the West Bank, and inside the West Bank are the settlements. Now, again, language. Settlement sounds nice, like you come in and you settle, and like, you settle into a chair and read a book, or you move to a place and you settle there and you make friends with your neighbors. But these settlements are not really settlements, they are colonies. So they come, they erase Palestinian villages and they build on top of them. And those are colonies. And it is the biggest crime to call them settlements. They are not settlements, they're colonies, because that's what they are. And so you have these colonies inside of the West Bank, ever increasing in size and in number. And then you have East Jerusalem, which is the agreed internationally as the capital of a future state of Palestine, but has now been taken over by Israel as well. And then you have Gaza, which is basically an open air prison that has been under siege since 2007. I think in a couple of days, they're gonna run out of electricity. And they're the worst possible human state you could live in. One of the most densely populated areas on earth, really just miserable, basically. So it's quite interesting. And Hamas is in Gaza, and the PLO is in the West Bank. And then East Jerusalem, of course, is controlled by Israel, and settlements are controlled by Israel as well. So it's quite funny that when Israel talks about the conflict, they talk about Hamas and, oh my God, those horrible people and like the terrorists and what else. But let's play a game of like, how would you like to be fucked by Israel? So, and excuse my language, you could be in the West Bank. You are a Palestinian living in the West Bank. You're living in your village. And then your village gets razed and they build a settlement on it. And therefore you're fucked. You now have to move somewhere else into those tiny areas still left for the Palestinians. Or you could be in Jerusalem, where you're a tourist in your own country. You have
residency that they give you, permanent residency, but you're not a citizen. They don't give you rights to vote. If you travel, they might revoke it. And you will hear more on this from Umayma and the video she shot. And yeah, so that's East Jerusalem. So you could be living, and then suddenly you're homeless because a settler came in and decided that he will steal your house, because if it's not him, it's going to be somebody else. And so you're fucked again. And then Gaza, I think like it's just, yeah, on a regular basis being bombed. And basically you just live there and die. And you can't really get out. And so you could either in Gaza live there quietly and die and like be killed, or you could like join Hamas and fire rockets and then get killed. In either way, you're fucked. So so the reality of like, oh my God, let's get rid of Hamas and let's get rid of this terrorist group, and then like based on the rhetoric, everything will be fine. But no, it's not fine, because if you take the Gaza model out, you're still stuck with either West Bank model or East Jerusalem model. And if you're in the West Bank model, anyone could come and take your village and make it a settlement. And if you're in the East Jerusalem, the settler can come and kick you out of your house. If you call the police, they will come and help the settler against you. So there is no model at the moment for Palestinian existence. The only way to peacefully resist is to have peaceful marches, then you get shot anyways, and or like call for international sanctions, and that would be BDS. And then, but anyone who is supporting BDS might very well likely be called anti-Semitic. And currently in Germany, BDS is no longer allowed, and this is now being challenged in the courts as infringement of freedom of opinion. Because you should be allowed to boycott whoever you want to boycott. No one can tell you you're forced to buy food from the settlement. Yeah, so there is there. So there's very little space to move, really. And this is the horrible reality of all of it. So I know we've like taken so much time. You guys are okay to stick around? I'm happy to stay. Let me stop sharing for a second. Let me see in the chat, just say a few yeses. Yes, okay, I see yeses. Okay, good. Okay, yeah, we made it. Good. Let me just open up Umayma's video. The sound is a little bit unclear, so I hope that we will be able to hear it properly. I will be posting this online in any case, and I will now share again. Yeah, yes, I am recording, and hopefully I will post this as well. So the video is 12 minutes. So if you want to watch it, stay. If you don't want to watch it, go get a cup of coffee or a tea and then come back, because I will answer questions if there are. Let me see, are there questions? There are 7 questions. So yeah, I will stay and answer questions. We start now, and just stick with me. We'll get through this. Okay, so let me start sharing, and hopefully it will play. And just tell me if someone could say in the chat if they can hear. Oh, shoot. Okay, no sound. Okay, so let me see why that we can't hear the audio and it is dark. Okay, let me try to see why. Okay, let me stop sharing for a second. Because normally with Zoom I couldn't show videos, but why it's not letting me. Shoot. So I asked Umayma to record the video from East Jerusalem, because that's where she lives, and to tell us what it is like to be there. So it's a really nice and evocative video. Yeah, I don't know how to make the sound work. So let me see. Yeah, I don't know. Okay, so this is how I will do it. We'll go to the questions, and I will post this on Twitter, and I will post it on Facebook, just the video on its own. So if you guys don't know, this is, wait,
This is my Twitter. Okay, so in case you got here in another way. There's a checkbox on the share window. Okay. So let me share, and I put this and share sound. Yes, okay, share. Okay, just a second. Now hopefully it let me know. Can you hear now?
As you can see, today we have a general strike.
Yeah.
Not
Okay,
only
good.
in Jerusalem, but also in historic Palestine, in the West Bank, in Gaza, which is under Israeli attack right now, and in the occupied Palestinian lands in 1948. And I will talk about the situation here in a bit. But first, let's walk to the Damascus Gate. باب العمود. Everything is closed. And as usual, soldiers everywhere. Damascus Gate is almost empty. There will be a demonstration here at 3 p.m. Jerusalem time. This is Damascus Gate. So, I would like to talk about our current status as Palestinians living in occupied East Jerusalem. So after the Nakba, or the 6 Days War in 1967, Israel took over the West Bank and decided to annex East Jerusalem and the territories of some 28 villages around East Jerusalem into the new so-called United Jerusalem, Eastern and Western. In these areas, there lived about 70,000 Palestinians, and in contrast to the West Bank, the Israeli law was applied in these areas. But the Palestinians living there were not given the status of Israeli citizens. Instead, we were given the status of permanent residents of Israel, which is a status given to foreign nationals wishing to reside in Israel. Today, there are more than 300,000 Palestinians living in East Jerusalem as permanent residents, and according to the law, the status of us is equal to tourists who enter Israel to reside there. As if after 1967, some 70,000 Palestinians have suddenly entered Israel overnight. Actually, unlike immigrants who freely choose to live in Israel and can return to their country of origin, the Palestinian residents of East Jerusalem have no other home, no legal status in any other country. And of course, we did not choose to live in Israel. It is Israel that occupied and annexed the land on which we live. So what does it mean to have an Israeli residency and not a citizenship? First of all, our residency status can be revoked on a regular basis. We are forced to defend our residency constantly by proving the location of our center of life to the Ministry of Interior and to the Social Security Services. We can lose our residency if we stay outside Israel for more than 7 years. And since 1967, Israel has revoked the permanent residency of more than 14,000 Palestinians from East Jerusalem under such circumstances. We are also required to submit requests for family reunification for spouses who are not residents themselves. I guess in 2003, the Knesset passed a law barring these spouses from receiving permanent residency, other than extreme exceptions. The law effectively denies us, as permanent residents of Israel, the possibility of living in East Jerusalem with spouses from Gaza or from other parts of the West Bank, and denies our children permanent residency status. Whereas a child of an Israeli citizen, even if born outside of Israel, to a mother who's not an Israeli citizen, automatically becomes a citizen. Even anyone living in any spot in the world whose mother or grandmother is Jew can get an Israeli citizenship and passport. This is completely absurd. And more than that, permanent residency confers fewer rights than citizenship. We cannot participate in national elections of the Knesset, either as voters or as candidates. We cannot run for the office of mayor, although we can vote in local elections and to run for City Council of Jerusalem. And regarding the travel, of course, only the citizens hold an Israeli passport that allows them to freely travel abroad and to return to Israel easily. But we don't hold an Israeli passport. Instead, we hold something called a travel document, which causes us many problems in each and every airport we pass by. So let's assume that I want to travel to Germany, for example, or any other European or non-European country, and because I have no passport and the international agreements do not apply to me, I have to go to the German representative office in Ramallah and convince officials there to issue me a visa, and in most cases I need an invitation from anyone living there in the target country, which means I cannot travel as a tourist. But before that, I have to apply for a travel document and book a meeting at the Interior Ministry branch in East Jerusalem, and because of the lack of proper services, might take months and months. I can simply summarize it in that Israeli policy in East Jerusalem is geared toward pressuring Palestinians to leave, thereby shaping a geographical and demographic reality that would thwart any future attempt to challenge Israeli sovereignty there. I think we cannot talk about the current situation in East Jerusalem and in Palestine in general without mentioning the neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah, which I assume that you've heard its name lately in the media. Actually, I will not talk much about Sheikh Jarrah. I think there is a lot of material on the social media, but it's important to say that Sheikh Jarrah is not the only neighborhood in Palestine that is in danger. Actually, Israel has been gradually stealing Palestinian land, destroying and ethnically cleansing entire Palestinian villages, violently displacing families and building illegal settlements on top of them since 1948. We can say that each Israeli city today was once Sheikh Jarrah. Israel is now bombing the children and citizens of Gaza. More than 200 deaths in less than 1 week. Horrible scenes in the media, and all is being documented and even filmed live while the whole world is watching. The situation is not better here in Jerusalem, also in the occupied 48 lands. We are under daily threats from the settlers and from the Israeli police. They are attacking, assaulting, and arresting people in the most violent ways that I've ever lived in my life. People are afraid to get out of their homes. They are afraid to send their children to schools. Settlers are even attacking people inside their homes with complete coverage and support from the Israeli government. Even Facebook and Instagram are restricting the Palestinian content and is muting the people who are trying to show the truth. The media is biased, the truth is being muted. Even the terminology used is biased. I don't think this is a conflict. It is not a conflict between Israel and Palestine. I will say it loud. What is happening in Palestine is not a conflict. What's happening in Palestine is settler colonialism. It is military occupation, land theft, and ethnic cleansing. It is systematic apartheid. A conflict means there is equal footing, which is not the case. The case is obvious. There is an active oppressor, Israel, and an oppressed, Palestine. There is a colonizer and there is the colonized. This is not a conflict. Today we are unarmed under governmental violence and oppression. We have nothing to do except striking. What can we do? In Europe, in America, in any other country of the world, keep posting and talking about Palestine. Protest in the streets of your countries. Donate. Boycott Israel products. And spread the truth. This educates and raises awareness and maybe help to force leaders to step in. Helps to expose what the media hides. Be the voice of the voiceless. One last word I would like to say before the demonstration starts. Never choose silence. Choosing silence in the times of injustice is choosing the side of the oppressor. Your silence gives consent. Free Palestine.
So thank you, Umayma, for the recording. I maybe we just leave the screen like this. It's a beautiful frame. So yeah, let's look at the Q&A. I don't have a lot of questions, but yeah, let's get through them. So so someone is saying hi from KSA. Hi. Will we get a recording? I am recording. I don't know if I will post it. Haven't decided yet. I need your feedback later. Just tell me how career ending will my talk be. Anyways, and yeah, speaking up can be dangerous sometimes. But anyways, so yeah, then Kiara is asking, what's the position of the Israeli left wing right now? Could they support Palestinian? The thing is that, so in general, it's land for peace, but you need to look at the political reality. So within the current political reality, you cannot remove the settlements. They exist, and the only person who was able to remove settlements was Sharon from Gaza, and that hasn't turned out to be quite well, given that they didn't like how people voted and are now under siege. But I don't think any political leader in the current Israeli political scene has the willpower and political capital to be able to remove settlements. So that means we have to accept that the reality of a two-state solution is extremely difficult to achieve, which means that doesn't matter what the left wing wants. It's untenable. Then if it's not the two-state solution, then what is it? in the peace plan that Kushner in his wisdom came up with, you got like a 1.5 state solution. So the Palestinians get to have a territory, they don't get East Jerusalem, they get something else, and like they're half a state, they're not really a country. That's not tenable either. And then you'll get the 1 state solution, which is likely the most just solution of all of them, because you can get both of them in one country with equal rights. But the political likeliness of that is also unimaginable currently in the current political climate. So I don't know. I think you would need to see a lot of change in the US-Israeli relationship, to the US be willing to basically inspire Israel to sort of, change the way it deals with Palestine. And so until then, it almost doesn't matter. The status quo is settlement building and theft. So no matter how much the left wing would want to support, the best they can do is to freeze the settlements. That's the best. But they currently don't have enough support locally to be able to win a majority and really have a mandate. The right wing has taken over completely. So they can barely form alliances. And so like you see in the last elections, they, even if they want to have peace, they're not they don't have the political mandate to do so at the moment. So yeah, they could, but like we need actions, we don't need words at the moment. So then there is Derek asking, how did Israelis become so powerful where Palestinians seemingly didn't? So I think this question, we need to go back to the 20s and 30s. So in the book that I referenced, and I quoted from earlier, the author talks about how the Israeli, not Israeli, they were Jewish at the time. They were Russian Jewish, basically, settlers coming in and getting land and forming these sort of like autonomous little enclaves that they had, where they did not work and have economic ties with any of the Palestinians around them. And they were becoming self-sufficient, and they were training militarily. So they knew what was coming and the Palestinians didn't. And so they were training for basically a confrontation. And so that's how it started. But then after 1948, and by the time after 67, with the US support for Israel, then you get the military aid, the weapons, the special treatments, the veto in support of Israel, all of that. And that's what really gave it political cover. And also you have to remember that like there is mandatory military conscription in Israel, so everyone goes except the Orthodox Jews. They don't serve, but everybody else serves. So the whole country is trained, basically all the adults, and the military power and military hegemony in the region is part of how they control that. That's why they overreact every time, that they need to be powerful in order to scare, basically. So that's a self-fulfilling prophecy as well. When you know that this is what you need to do and you have the means to do it, then it becomes a goal and a question of survival. Then Ibrahim is asking, how can we help Palestine, especially as designers? I think it depends where you are. If you are living in the, in North America or in Europe, you could write to your representative to ask for, that they treat, this issue more fairly. You could vote for people who would. You could demonstrate when there is a demonstration. You could design protest posters, download Omeima's typeface, Lifta, the one that won the award. It's a protest typeface. It's meant to protest. Make posters, print them, put them up, put them on T-shirts. That's how you could do as a designer. If you are in the Middle East, depends how repressive the regime you live in is, because most of them are repressive. In some areas in the Gulf, you will not be able to do anything and speak up for Palestine in the current climate, in which case the best that you could do is amplify voices online. And like, this is what I try. I just retweet, and I design fonts, but it's not enough. But I try to retweet and to give voice, right? Someone was saying on Twitter that, those of you who are away and you can't
do anything on the ground, but at least help amplify Palestinian voices. There is a campaign to delete content, Palestinian content, from Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. More Facebook and Instagram than Twitter, but yeah. So we need to help amplify their voices. That's what we can do from outside. That's the best. And donate if you can. You can donate to the charities that give medical treatment, for example. That could work, or just voice support. They need it. There's not a lot that we can do, but some of the things we can do can help. And just tell the story like I'm doing now. All I'm doing is telling a story. Just tell it and help educate so that we can turn the tide and people know, because I really doubt that anyone could know the facts and not support them. Honestly, I seriously doubt that. Not with a human heart, knowing everything that we've talked about today. Then there's an anonymous one. Would you encourage any of us wanting to make art discuss this openly to use free Palestine or decolonize Palestine? Free can sound like an adjective instead of a verb. Yes, I agree. Decolonize, it's much better, because it really is about colonization. We're saying no to colonization. And so definitely decolonize Palestine is a perfect slogan. It's quite good. Thank you. Victor, I find myself philosophically wondering if the current political frameworks are necessary. Must Palestinians form a state to be well? Must Israel? The thing is, yeah, like I heard recently, do we really need countries? Can't we just have cities? But in the end, you need to have treaties. You need to be able to control your economy. You need to have your borders. You need to have trade. You need to function as services and what else. And for that, you need the country, because you need to be able to guarantee equal treatment for your citizens. If you cannot guarantee that, then it's pointless. So the current situation, the heart of the problem, is that Palestinians are not guaranteed equal rights or freedoms anywhere in Palestine, whether it is in Gaza or the West Bank or East Jerusalem, nowhere. And the Palestinian refugees outside of Palestine also do not have equal rights if they do not hold citizenship of another country. So we in Lebanon treat the Palestinian refugees very poorly, abysmal record of treating the Palestinians. And so, yeah, basically you're fucked either way. It's horrible. So yeah, no, we need a state, because the state is the absolute guarantor of the safety of its citizens. And when it comes to the Palestinians, the heart of the problem is that they're not safe. They're getting killed all the time. So yeah, we do need, even philosophically, we need to guarantee their freedom. Someone has to. And then finally, do you have any recommendations for us ordinary citizens for things we can do to help? This is from Dylan. Thank you for the question. I think you're already helping, because you're here and you're listening to someone from another country speaking, in her second language, but you're involving yourself to want to learn, and I think that's the first step. So I think the best thing we can do is to spread awareness of the injustice of what is going on, to show the reality of what it is, to uncover the hidden and obvious biases in the reporting, and to challenge our leaderships in the places where we are and they have democracies to be able to be more fair. So this is how we do as citizens, right? And so you can exercise your democratic rights by voting for people who care about Palestine, by speaking up, by demonstrating peacefully. Obviously, you can, like I said, donate if for many of these organizations who are trying to help. Of course, look for a reputable one that you can trust. But then that would be the reactive role. The proactive role is to just become vocal, retweet those tweets that are talking about what is going on. Tell your friends who don't know in an easy and simple way. Just tell them this is a colony where its people are trying to be free, So yeah, I mean, there's not a lot that we can do, but I think the tide is turning, and it will turn when there is more of us speaking up. So just being able to speak up, I think that will make all the difference. I hope, right? Because yeah, it's not like we're gonna go there. This view I will never see in my lifetime. I don't think I will ever be able to go to Jerusalem, right? So it's not like we can just pick up and go there and demonstrate there. But yeah,
peaceful resistance, boycott. You could boycott. that could be a good thing. At least you could boycott products from the settlements because those are illegal. If you want to boycott Israel, that's even better. If you want to boycott, companies that are paying into the building of settlements, that's also better. There's a lot that can be done, but just also learn how to use the words, because some people in their rush to support the Palestinians will say things that are not good or not right and can be easily misconstrued as being anti-Semitic, where it's really the political project, that we have a problem with. It's colonization that we don't want. So just learn the words, read. I can make a list and post it on the same event page. So if you go back to it again and just read the articles, I can post a few sources. I think, no, that's all we can do. Tell other people. and next time I talk, bring them with you. So let me see. Do we? Yeah. Are there any other questions? I'm seeing people are chatting. Someone's saying, "I love your fonts." Alina, yeah, thank you. Okay, yeah, I'm just running through. Kushner is a joke. Yeah, I agree. And then, regarding the one-state solution, by the way, I recommend that follow the American journalist Peter Beinart. He is a Jewish American, and he is vocally in support of the one-state solution. He wrote an article about this a few months back, which created a seismic earthquake, in both Israeli and US politics, because he's such a well-known figure and such a well-respected person. And he argues beautifully why we should push for one state with equal rights, one man, one vote, or one person, one human, one vote, right? Not just men, women as well, obviously. So, but read what he has to say. He's good, I can also make a list of the people that I follow, these are good voices, and the Jewish organizations that are pro-peace, we amplify their voices as well, because it is our role to show that Netanyahu does not speak for every Jewish person. And if a person is Jewish, they do not mean they support Israel and the current Israeli government, because a lot of them do not. And we need to respect the choices that they have made and their views. And so we owe it to them to not hate globally and disagree globally and paint them with a broad picture. So recognizing the nuances, that's something we also need to do, right? But yeah, Peter Beinart, definitely. And people, it's so cute. Everyone's saying they have to go and apologizing. You don't need to apologize, you guys. I mean, we've gone way over time. I mean, we are in one state, but it's apartheid. But no, we need state, which is a democracy with equal rights. But there is one thing that I need to say. We've gotten to this point, which is an extremely existential crisis for Israel, because Israel will no longer be a democracy and Jewish. It will no longer be able to do both. It will either be a democracy where it's split half-half between the Muslim and the Jewish population, or it will be Jewish and it will be apartheid, which is what we have now. And this is an existential crisis. And they do not see that they're driving themselves towards the wall. If I were American, I would guide my friend towards a policy that will take them away from the abyss, because you never want your country to be the object of international sanctions the same way South Africa was. But when you go towards the policies of apartheid, that's the route that you will face. And so, we need the equality. That's the only humane, moral way out of it. But that means that Zionism has failed. At least the revisionist Zionism, practical Zionism would still have been okay. So anyways, I see people sharing links. That's good. If there are questions, just put them in the Q&A, because I can't. Okay, let me see. There is a question from Sarah. I didn't know Sarah was here. Hi. I'm making a screen print that I released this week and would love to donate proceeds to a charity. I wonder if you have recommendations. Yes, the MOP that someone put in the chat,
They are a UK-based charity, which means that it's tax deductible. I am planning to also donate to them as well. So that would be the one I would recommend, definitely. Thank you. Remando has posted the link to Peter Beinart. Yeah, that's the guy. He's amazing. And who do you see leading the state in the one-state solution? I don't really know. It could be that you have power sharing structures like federations, and then you take turns ruling with devolved areas. I mean, you could solve this politically. The question of who rules can be solved if everyone has equal rights in de facto and de jure, so both in practice and by law. Figuring out a political structure to fix it is not a problem. It can be done, and it happens in many places. Look at Belgium. Belgium, there's like the French-speaking side, the Flemish-speaking side. They've never had a war. They've coexisted, and they somehow managed to rule together. There are many other places where you have power-sharing structures. In Lebanon, we do it very badly. Don't follow our model, but it can be done. There is enough flexibility in political thought to be able to allow for ethnicities coming together once the political will is there. So okay, no. Okay, let's see. Like lots of nice things in the chat. Thank you guys. I will post on Twitter if I do make it. I will, if I post it, I will send an email to the participants if it is posted, in case you would like to share it with people. And thank you for everyone. I think we can, we're almost at the 2 hours, so we can start wrapping it up. There is one other question. What do you think of Hezbollah's intervention in Israel to supposedly help the Palestinian cause? A minefield. It's not really helping. Not at the moment. I mean, the rockets that were fired from south of Lebanon, they were not Hezbollah. It was somebody else, and they got sort of arrested, as far as I understand. But it's not helping. It's the same way that Hamas is not helping, because it takes away from the cause, from what is happening. It takes away the focus, because the focus is East Jerusalem and the people who are being evicted. The focus is the colony, not what one group, which could be recognized as a terrorist group by a variety of nations. It changes the narrative. It becomes Israel has the right to defend itself. But if the narrative is Palestinian families are being kicked out of their homes to be able to change the nature of Jerusalem into a Jewish one, and they are being forced away, Israel cannot say, we have the right to defend ourselves. That's how you change the narrative. So military intervention from either Gaza or Hezbollah is not helping. I know they mean well, but it's not helping. We need to change the narrative. So I think we need to focus on what is really at the heart of it. And I am really heartened to finish on a positive note, to see a new generation of Palestinians who are eloquent and who are able to speak to an international audience and to tell their story. And what we need to do is basically amplify their voices. That's what we need to do. There are many of them on Twitter. I like Mariam al-Barghouti. She's doing a really great job. There is Mohammed Kurd, I think. He was already interviewed on a couple of US channels already. And so there's people who are speaking. And there is momentum. The reality of every day, every time we see like the people dying and the buildings falling, and it's horror. But there is hope at the heart of it, because we are seeing Palestinian unity for the first time since the Nakba. And I think, it's horror, but there might be light at the end of the tunnel. If you asked me last year, there was no light. It was a shit show everywhere. Now there might be light. So can we see your face before we go? Yes. I will stop sharing. Yeah. Where is it? Hi. So this is me. Charlie is in the other room. So I will share pictures of puppies later. But yeah, anyways. So thank you for everyone who has joined. We're still with half of people are still here. You guys are amazing. Thank you. And it seems like there will be a ceasefire on Thursday, in which case things will quiet down. And you might think that, oh my God, now it's done. We don't have to worry anymore.
But if there is one thing you could take away from everything I said today, is that no, it's not done when the rockets stop falling. The reality, the status quo is continuous theft of Palestinian land. That's why we need to keep this in the news. That's why we need to keep pushing that just stop stealing, basically. Stop the colonization. That we need at least as a goal that they don't build more settlements, at least until we find a way out of all of this. So yeah, thank you again. And yeah, I just take care, use a mask. It's crazy this is happening. By the way, Israel is not allowing vaccines into Gaza, by the way. So they bomb them and they also don't allow vaccines. So just FYI on the horror of all of this is there is a pandemic that is raging in Gaza and people are having to huddle, families together. 40, how many displaced? Thousands of people displaced, having to huddle into already highly densely populated. And of course, there's no social distancing there because that is a luxury that the people in Gaza don't have. So one last thought. That's not so hopeful, but yeah, sorry, I was meaning to finish on a happier note. But yeah, thank you again. And I really appreciate that you've joined me. Thank you. Thanks. Bye-bye. Take care.